The man behind the silence. The lights in the studio were dimmed just enough to make the stage feel like a sacred place. Cameras panned slowly. Audience members leaned forward in their seats. The air felt thick, like something meaningful was about to unfold, something big. On the stage sat two people the world knew well. On one side, Oprah Winfrey, the queen of conversations, known for her piercing empathy and ability to bring truths out from the deepest corners of the soul. Across from her sat Keanu Reeves, silent, calm, and with that familiar gentle smile. But this time, something was different. Keanu wasn't there to promote a film. He wasn't there to talk about Hollywood. He was there because he had something to say, something that had never left his heart. And tonight, he had chosen this moment to share it. Oprah looked at him gently and said, "Keanu, the world sees you as this mysterious man of peace, always kind, always grounded. But people wonder, where does that come from?" For a moment, he didn't speak. The silence wasn't awkward. It was heavy, meaningful. He finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "It comes from pain," he said. "The kind you don't talk about at parties. The kind that stays with you, long after the world thinks you've moved on." Oprah's brow furrowed, sensing the gravity. What kind of pain? Keanu looked down. His hands were folded. The audience held its breath. "I was 17 when I saw my father walk away from our family. He didn't even say goodbye. Just left. His voice didn't shake, but his eyes did. And when he left, I promised myself two things. First, that I would never become him. Second, that I would never let bitterness be stronger than kindness." Oprah leaned in. "That's a powerful promise." "I thought it was enough," Keanu said. "But life had more lessons waiting." He looked out into the audience. Some faces were already glistening with tears. They had seen him in action roles, saving worlds and dodging bullets. But this was different. This was raw. "My best friend, River Phoenix," Keanu continued. "He was like a brother to me. Talented, beautiful soul. We used to talk about building something together. Maybe a theater, maybe a retreat for young actors. And then, one night, he was gone." His voice caught for just a moment, then steadied again. "You think you have time. You think you can call tomorrow. And then suddenly, there is no tomorrow." Oprah's eyes shimmered. "How did you deal with that?" "I didn't. Not at first," he said honestly. "I ran. Into my work. Into silence. Into the kind of loneliness that doesn't look sad from the outside, but eats at you inside." There was a pause, a long one. The audience didn't stir. No coughs, no fidgeting. Just silence, honoring his truth. Then Oprah said something unexpected. "I've interviewed hundreds of people, Keanu. But there's something about your pain. It doesn't make you hard. It makes you kind." "How?" Keanu smiled, just slightly. "Because I met someone who showed me what it meant to live after the pain. Someone who had lost more than me, and yet chose love." Oprah tilted her head. "Who?" "Her name was Mia," Keanu said softly. "She wasn't famous. No red carpets. Just heart. Pure heart. A woman named Mia." He met Mia at a volunteer shelter in Los Angeles. Keanu had walked in without cameras, without an entourage, just a hoodie, a cap, and a need to do something real. He had been donating quietly for years to children's hospitals and animal rescues, but something in him told him it was time to be there. Not just give money, but give time. Mia was in her early 30s, working full-time at the shelter for rescued dogs and abused pets. Her hands were always dirty, her smile was always bright, and she had a laugh that made everyone else forget why they were sad. The first time Keanu saw her, she was sitting on the ground, cradling a trembling dog that had been left on the freeway. She spoke to it like it was her child, not with pity, but with love. "You're safe now," she had whispered. "Nobody's gonna hurt you ever again." Keanu stood there, frozen. Not because she didn't recognize him. She didn't even glance his way. but because in that moment she reminded him of River, of the softness he had lost. "Do you work here?" Mia had asked him later, when she finally noticed. He had laughed. "Not yet." And from that moment on, he kept coming back, not because he had to, but because he needed to. Mia didn't treat him like a movie star. She treated him like a man trying to find his peace. They spent hours together, cleaning kennels, feeding animals, nursing broken wings and broken spirits. And somewhere in the middle of all that mess and kindness, Keanu found something he didn't know he was missing. Forgiveness. A love built on healing. "She taught me that loving something broken doesn't mean fixing it," Keanu said quietly to Oprah. "It means standing beside it, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts." Oprah blinked quickly. Her voice wavered. "Did you fall in love with her?" "Yes," he replied simply. He went on to share how they never lived in mansions or traveled on jets. Their dates were night walks with the dogs. Their happiest moments were Sunday mornings feeding stray animals and drinking cheap coffee. But just like everything beautiful in his life, this too was touched by pain. The cruel twist. One day, Maya didn't show up at the shelter. Keanu called her. No answer. He went to her apartment and found her neighbor crying. Mia had collapsed, rushed to the hospital. A late-stage diagnosis, cancer, aggressive. "She never told me," Keanu whispered. "She didn't want me to hurt." He paused. Everyone watching, on set, on camera, across the world, held their breath. "But I would have taken all her pain if I could. Every last drop." Keanu spent every day at her hospital bedside, reading her favorite books, playing old songs, even bringing in the rescued dog they had adopted together, Leo, the one from the freeway. "She made me promise something," he said. She said, "When I'm gone, don't mourn me with silence. Share my story, not because of me, but because someone out there needs to know that love, real love, is not afraid of scars." His voice trembled slightly, but he didn't cry. Oprah did, in front of the world. Tears streamed down her face, not for drama, not for television, but because something deep inside her cracked open. "Thank you for sharing this," she whispered. And Keanu, the man known for dodging bullets and riding through action-packed chaos, nodded gently. "Thank you for listening." The promise that never died. After the cameras stopped rolling, the studio lights dimmed, and the applause faded into quiet reverence, Keanu Reeves sat still. Oprah had given him a gentle hug before walking off stage, whispering "thank you" with tears in her eyes. But he remained in that chair a moment longer. The story he had shared. The story of Mia, the woman who taught him how to love again, had not been easy to tell, but it needed to be told. Not for him, not even for Mia, but for everyone out there carrying a silent ache in their chest, believing they were alone in their pain. He stood and walked out of the studio without a word to anyone. He didn't need an entourage. He didn't need celebration. What he needed was to keep a promise. The silent days. Grief doesn't come with loud crashes. It settles in quietly, like dust. In the days after Mia passed away, Keanu disappeared from the public eye. No new films, no events, no interviews. His manager told the press he was taking time to reset, but the truth was far more personal. Keanu moved into a small house near Big Bear Lake. It wasn't fancy. The floors creaked, and the roof leaked when it rained. But it reminded him of Mia, simple, honest, and surrounded by nature. He'd wake early, often before sunrise. He'd make 2 cups of tea, out of habit, then drink one in silence while the other sat untouched across the table. Leo, the dog he and Mia had rescued, never left his side. The old pup seemed to understand. Every morning, Leo would rest his head on Keanu's knee as they watched the fog roll across the lake. It became their new ritual, man and dog, mourning the same soul in different ways. Mia's journal. One rainy afternoon, Keanu found something that would change everything. He had been going through old boxes, trying to sort through Mia's things with the care of someone who knew every object had meaning. Beneath a stack of old photos and dried flowers was a small leather-bound journal. He didn't recognize it. He hesitated before opening it, afraid of what memories it might stir. Inside the cover, in her looping handwriting, was a note. "If you ever find this, it means you're ready. Now go do something beautiful." The pages were filled with sketches of dogs, stories of animals the shelter had rescued, and dreams that Mia never got to finish. But at the very back of the journal was a list. It was titled, "The Kindness Project." Each bullet point was a goal she had once whispered to Keanu during late-night talks. Build a healing center for abused animals and children. Create a mobile vet clinic for poor neighborhoods. Start a reading program for lonely seniors with therapy dogs. Donate warmth, blankets, socks, food, love. Prove that kindness is louder than pain. Keanu closed the journal slowly. His hands trembled, not out of fear, but purpose. Mia's voice rang in his memory. "Don't mourn me with silence." And just like that, the fog inside his heart began to lift, from actor to advocate. Most people didn't see it coming. The media had grown used to Keanu's disappearances. He would vanish for months, then return with a new movie, smiling softly in interviews and avoiding personal questions. But this time, when he returned, he wasn't holding a script. He was holding a mission. He started small, anonymously funding animal shelters across California. When people noticed, he shrugged it off. But then came the interviews, and in one of them, he said, "I'm not doing this to look good. I'm doing this because someone I love believed in kindness more than anything else. And she's gone now. So I'm picking up where she left off." Those words went viral. It wasn't the headline people expected. It wasn't a scandal. It wasn't a tabloid story. It was a man, grieving out loud, and doing something about it. The first shelter. The first project he launched was a healing center in Northern California. Not just an animal shelter, but a sanctuary for trauma survivors. The idea came straight from Mia's journal, a place where abandoned animals and broken hearts could heal together. He named it Mia's Promise. The opening ceremony was quiet. No red carpet, no media frenzy. Just a ribbon, a sign, and a group of kids from a local foster care center holding rescued puppies. Keanu gave a short speech. "This place exists because one woman believed that love should never be wasted. Not on people, not on animals, not on ourselves." One little girl, maybe 7 or 8, tugged on his sleeve after the speech. "Did you really love her?" she asked. Keanu knelt beside her, more than anything. The girl hugged him tightly. "Then she's still here, in your hugs." He held her for a long time, fighting tears. In that one moment, he realized something he hadn't before. Mia wasn't gone. Not really. Not if her love was still helping others. Oprah's quiet return. 2 months after the interview, Oprah visited the shelter unannounced. She arrived with a single camera, no crew, and asked if she could walk through the center privately. Keanu welcomed her like an old friend. She sat with children reading books to therapy dogs. She watched an elderly man laugh as a golden retriever lay across his lap. She walked through the garden where Mia's favorite flowers had been planted, lavender and forget-me-nots. "This is holy," Oprah whispered. Keanu smiled. Mia believed healing wasn't a miracle. It was a decision we made every day. "And you made it," Oprah said. Keanu shook his head. "We made it. Together." The ripple effect. What started with one shelter became many. Within a year, Keanu had opened 5 more healing centers under the name Mia's Promise. Each one specialized in unique programs, helping veterans with PTSD, children from abusive homes, seniors who had no families, and stray animals needing love. People from all walks of life began volunteering. Celebrities, students, single moms, retired teachers. But no one came for fame. They came for hope. Keanu didn't seek attention, but his humility drew people in. And when they asked him why he was doing this, he always said the same thing. Because love doesn't end with goodbye. The letter from a stranger. One evening, after a long day at one of the centers, Keanu sat down with Leo curled at his feet. A volunteer handed him a stack of letters. One envelope stood out, handwritten, slightly smudged, addressed only to the man who kept his promise. Inside was a letter from a young woman in Ohio. She had watched the interview with Oprah and shared how she had lost her mother to cancer. She had been on the edge, barely eating, barely breathing. But then she saw Keanu speak about Mia, about grief, about love. "You didn't even know me," she wrote, "but you saved me. You showed me that grief can be turned into grace. I'm volunteering now. I'm rescuing animals. I'm rescuing myself." Keanu closed the letter, wiped his eyes, and whispered to the empty room, "Thank you, Mia." The boy who never smiled. The rain had stopped that morning. The sky over Los Angeles looked softer, as if the clouds themselves had taken a breath. In a quiet corner of the city, far from the flashing lights of red carpets and premieres, a school bus pulled up to the gates of one of the newest Mia's Promise healing centers. It was the third shelter Keanu had opened. This one was built not just for animals, but for children. Especially children who had seen too much, too soon. Kids stepped off the bus slowly. Some held hands. Others clutched old stuffed animals. A few had that distant look. The kind of gaze that didn't belong to children. The kind born from loss, fear, and memories that made bedtime feel like a punishment. Keanu was there, standing quietly by the entrance. He wore no sunglasses, no suit. Just jeans, a flannel shirt, and a quiet heart. Leo, the old dog, stood beside him, tail wagging. But one boy didn't move. He sat in the last seat on the bus, his hood pulled up, arms crossed tightly around his chest. A scar peeked out from beneath the edge of his sleeve. His shoes were 2 sizes too small, and he hadn't spoken a single word the entire ride. His name was Elias. Eyes that wouldn't meet yours. Elias had been through more in 9 years than most face in a lifetime. His mother had died of an overdose. His father, long gone. He had bounced between foster homes, group homes, shelters, and back again. He didn't talk. He didn't cry. He didn't even flinch when yelled at. He just stared at walls. The school counselor had begged for him to be placed in the new healing center. She said, "He doesn't need another rulebook. He needs a reason to feel something again." So Elias came, reluctantly, silently, and Keanu noticed him immediately. Not because he was loud, but because he was still. Still in that way that signaled something deeper. As the other children explored the center, feeding animals, reading stories to dogs, learning to brush rescued horses, Elias sat on the back steps, not watching, just existing. Keanu walked over, sat next to him, and said nothing. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. Finally, Keanu spoke without looking at him. "You know what's weird?" Elias didn't answer. "People think animals are silent," Keanu said, "but they're not. They just speak in ways humans forget how to hear." Elias shifted slightly. "Dogs don't lie," Keanu added. "They know when someone's hurting, and they stay, no matter what." A long pause. Then, barely above a whisper, Elias muttered, "I don't like people." Keanu nodded slowly. "I didn't either. Not for a long time." And just like that, a thread of trust formed. Thin, fragile, but real. The dog who chose him. Later that afternoon, while other kids played in the garden, Keanu brought out a dog that had been recently rescued. She was a skinny black and white mutt with a broken ear and a limp. Her name was Bella. "She doesn't trust people," the staff had warned. "Won't let anyone near." But as soon as Keanu opened Bella's kennel door, she walked straight past every child, every adult, and sat down in front of Elias. They stared at each other. And then, slowly, painfully, she laid her head on his knee. Elias didn't smile, but his hand moved. Just once. He touched her head, gently. It was the first time he had reached for anyone in over a year. A message from the past. That night, after the kids had gone home, Keanu sat in his office surrounded by files, letters, and old journal pages from Mia. He was looking for something. He didn't know what, but his heart was restless. Then he found a folded paper, old, yellowed, a corner torn. It was something Mia had written long ago. One day, a child will walk into one of these places, too broken to speak. You won't need to talk. Just sit with him. Wait. Kindness doesn't always come with noise. His breath caught. She had known. Somehow, she had seen Elias before he ever arrived. He closed his eyes and whispered, "We found him, Mia." The letter from an old friend. The next day brought an unexpected visitor. A black car pulled up to the shelter gate. Keanu, raking leaves out front, raised his brow as the window rolled down. Inside was Sandra Bullock. She stepped out, smiling warmly, holding a large donation check and a box of freshly baked cookies. "You didn't think I was going to let you do all the healing without me, did you?" she teased. They hugged like siblings reunited after war. Keanu and Sandra had shared years of memories, on screen and off. She had seen him at his highest and lowest. She knew the weight he carried. And now, she wanted to help. He brought her inside, showed her the therapy rooms, the animal enclosures, the children's reading spaces, and then he introduced her to Elias. "This is Sandra," Keanu said gently. "She's kind of a big deal." Elias didn't react. Sandra smiled. "I'm nobody, but I brought cookies." For the first time, a flicker of a smirk crossed Elias's face. Not quite a smile, but close. Building a bridge. That evening, Sandra pulled Keanu aside. "This place," she said, "it's more than a shelter. It's a sanctuary." Mia would be proud. Keanu looked out the window at Elias, who was now brushing Bella's fur with quiet focus. "He's opening up," Keanu said, "inch by inch." "He's you," Sandra said softly. Keanu looked at her, puzzled. "You were that boy once," she explained. "And now you're the man giving him what you never had." He didn't respond, but he didn't need to. The fire and the gift. A week later, disaster struck. A fire broke out at a nearby apartment complex. Dozens of families were displaced overnight. The shelter opened its doors immediately, turning its event room into a makeshift refuge. Keanu didn't hesitate. He cooked. He carried mattresses. He read stories to crying children. And Elias. Elias helped too. Without being asked, he carried water bowls to the animals. He comforted a crying toddler. And when a woman collapsed in panic, Elias put his arms around her and said, "You're safe here." Keanu saw it. The boy who never smiled was healing. A small voice in the dark. That night, long after everyone else had gone to sleep, Elias found Keanu sitting on the back steps. He sat beside him, just like before. Then, in the quiet, he said, "Do you think people can come back from anything?" Keanu looked at him. "I do. Even the bad stuff. Especially the bad stuff." Elias nodded, then whispered, "Can you teach me how to help people, the way you do?" Keanu didn't speak. He just wrapped an arm around the boy's shoulder. Not all wounds heal in hospitals. Sometimes they heal in silence. Sometimes in the touch of a dog. And sometimes in the company of someone who simply refuses to give up on you. The voice the world needed to hear. The winter air was crisp over the hills surrounding the healing center. The trees rustled gently in the breeze, and the sky had that soft, silver-gray color that made the world feel calm and thoughtful. It had been 3 months since Elias first walked through the gates of Mia's promise, a frightened boy with shadows under his eyes and a silence heavier than grief itself. Now something had changed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sudden. But it was real. Elias had started to speak, Not just to Keanu, not just to Bella, but to others. Small words at first, quiet replies, then full sentences. Now he even asked questions. He started helping the younger kids who came through the shelter. He told them which dogs liked belly rubs, which horses needed a gentle hand. But most importantly, he had started writing. The notebook. It was Keanu who first noticed it. Elias would sit under the old oak tree behind the center every afternoon with a little black notebook. He never said what he was writing, and no one asked. But one day, he left it behind. Keanu found it lying open on the bench, the wind fluttering its pages. He hesitated, but curiosity, and something deeper, pulled him to read. Inside were stories, short ones, about lost dogs, about scared kids, about a boy who thought he was invisible until a broken-eared dog looked at him like he mattered. And on the last page, a poem. I was quiet because the world was loud. I was small because pain was big. I was alone because I forgot how to hope. But then you sat beside me and said nothing. And that was the loudest love I'd ever heard. Keanu sat on the bench for a long time, staring at those words. They weren't just a child's scribbles. They were a mirror of everything this center stood for. And suddenly, he knew what he had to do next. The speech. A few weeks later, Mia's promise was chosen to be honored at a National Kindness Summit in Washington, D.C., an event where leaders, educators, and changemakers gathered to share stories of hope and healing. Keanu was invited to speak. It was supposed to be a formal event. Suits, cameras, speeches. But Keanu had a different idea. He walked into the office of the center's director, held up the notebook, and said, I want Elias to speak instead. He's only 10, she replied, and he's never stood in front of a crowd. I know, Keanu said, but the world needs to hear this. From him. Preparing to fly, when Keanu asked Elias if he'd like to come with him to Washington, the boy didn't answer right away. You'd be in front of a lot of people, Keanu said gently, but you won't be alone. Elias looked at Bella, then at Keanu. Can she come? Keanu smiled. Absolutely. On the day of their flight, they arrived at the airport in simple clothes. No security swarm, no press. Just a man, a boy, and a dog, carrying a notebook and a promise. Sandra Bullock had secretly arranged a private cabin for them on the plane. When they boarded, she left a note on the seat. For the boy who learned how to roar. Elias chuckled for the first time in months. Not a fake laugh, a real one. Washington, D.C. The summit hall was massive. Golden lights, velvet seats, people in suits and ties, and on the main screen was a name most people didn't expect. Elias Ramirez, 10 years old, guest speaker, Mia's Promise Foundation. When they called his name, the room hushed. People leaned forward. Elias walked up slowly. Bella stayed at his side, leash held gently in his hand. Keanu waited off stage, eyes filled with silent encouragement. Elias stood behind the podium. The microphone looked too big for him. The stage lights seemed too bright. But he reached into his jacket, pulled out the notebook, and opened it. Then he spoke. His voice was soft, uncertain at first, but every word was clear. When I got to Mia's Promise, I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to smile. I didn't want to live. The room froze. But a man sat next to me, and he didn't try to fix me. He just stayed. He paused, looking down at Bella. And a dog came to me. She didn't care that I was broken. She just stayed too. He turned a page. Now I help others. I tell them it's okay to be sad. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to need someone to sit with you and say nothing at all. He closed the notebook. And then, after a breath that seemed to carry the weight of every lonely night, he looked at the crowd and said, Sometimes silence is the beginning of healing. Someone taught me that. His name is Keanu Reeves. And this center saved my life. The entire room stood. not out of politeness, but because something sacred had just happened. The video that changed everything. A journalist recorded Elias's speech and posted it with the caption, "A 10-year-old boy just broke the hearts of 1,000 adults with one truth. Kindness doesn't have to shout." Within hours, the video went viral. Celebrities shared it. Teachers played it in classrooms. Shelters reached out to partner with Mia's promise. And Keanu. He watched from his quiet room that night, hands clasped over his heart, as the world listened to the boy who once wouldn't speak. Elias didn't go back to being invisible. He became a symbol, not of pity, but of powerful survival. An unexpected letter. 1 week after the summit, Keanu received a handwritten letter. It came from someone he hadn't heard from in over 20 years. His father. The letter was brief, awkward, but honest. "I watched the video. I saw the boy. I saw you. I don't deserve anything from you. But if your heart still has room, I would like to talk." Keanu sat with the letter in his lap for a long time. And for the first time in decades, he didn't feel anger. He just felt ready. Full circle. At the next group session in the healing center, Keanu sat among the children. Elias was reading aloud from his notebook. Bella rested her head on his foot. Keanu glanced around the room. At kids laughing, dogs wagging tails, and staff sharing coffee and warmth. And he realized something. This wasn't just Mia's dream anymore. It was a movement. Keanu stands at the back of the center that night, looking up at the stars. He pulls out Mia's journal, opens it to the last page, and writes, "We did it." The journalist who didn't believe in healing. The sun had just begun to dip below the horizon, casting long golden streaks over the hills behind Mia's promise. Children were reading aloud to therapy dogs under the sycamore trees. Volunteers swept the walkways, and in the back of the garden, Keanu was quietly replanting a row of lavender that had withered during the cold snap. The scent reminded him of her. Mia had loved lavender, said it smelled like peace. Leo lay in the dirt beside him, snoring softly. Everything about this evening was calm. Until a sleek black car pulled up to the front gate. The woman at the gate. She stepped out in a crisp coat, black boots polished, sunglasses pushed into her hair. She held a leather-bound notebook and a camera bag, the strap worn from years of use. Her expression was guarded, her movements precise. It wasn't hard to tell. She wasn't here for the animals. Her name was Nora Vale, a rising journalist known for her viral takedown pieces and hard-hitting features. If there was a secret hiding somewhere, she found it. If there was a soft story dressed up as inspiration, she exposed the cracks. She had flown in from New York after seeing the viral video of Elias's speech. Her editor had pitched it as a soft human piece, something about celebrity redemption and healing centers. Nora didn't believe in soft stories. She believed in facts. And this one didn't add up. Keanu Reeves, action star, mystery man, Hollywood's sad sweetheart, suddenly running a network of healing shelters. There had to be more. First impressions. Keanu met her at the gate, wiping his hands on his jeans. He didn't wear a badge. Didn't announce himself. Just smiled and said, "You're here for the tour." "And an interview," Nora replied quickly. "Of course," he said, "but only if you stay for dinner." "I don't." "You'll want to," he said with that same quiet certainty that had moved so many. He led her inside. Nora took notes. Fast, eyes scanning everything. Dogs that weren't caged, but curled up beside children. A therapy room where a girl painted while a golden retriever lay still beside her. Boys brushing horses. Volunteers serving soup and laughing in soft voices. There were no rehearsed smiles. No stage dressing. It was real. And it confused her. The interview. They sat on the back patio under string lights. Nora flipped open her notebook and clicked her pen. "I'm not here to tell your story," she said. "I'm here to understand it." Keanu nodded. "That's fair." "You've always been private," she started. Why open up now? He looked out toward the garden. Because someone I love believed stories weren't just for the living. They were for the healing. This Mia, she said, she's real. He nodded. Realer than most. You built all this for her. Because of her, he corrected. For the ones who come after. Nora scribbled something, then asked, Are you trying to save people? Keanu looked at her directly, gently. No, he said. I'm just trying to give them a place where they don't have to save themselves alone. The story behind the story. Nora stayed longer than she planned. She watched as a shy boy handed her a drawing of his therapy dog. She saw an elderly woman weep softly as a child read her a poem. She watched Elias, once so withdrawn, now leading a group of new arrivals on a tour, telling them it was okay to cry, okay to be quiet, okay to stay. Nora's hands tightened on her notebook. This wasn't the kind of story she knew how to write. Not because it lacked truth, but because it lacked an angle. No scandal, no secret, just people, hurting, healing, helping. Nora's secret. That night, she couldn't sleep. She paced the guest room Keanu had offered her. A simple space, a soft quilt, a photograph of Mia with Leo framed above the desk. She sat down and opened her own notebook. Not to take notes, but to look at something hidden in the back pocket. A photograph. A man. A boy. A dog. The man was her brother. The boy. His son. The dog. Ruby. A pit bull mix with eyes full of love. They had died 2 years ago in a house fire. The only survivor was the boy, 10-year-old Max. He hadn't spoken since, and Nora, his godmother, had buried herself in work ever since. She came to write a story about Keanu Reeves. But somehow, the story had come for her. The confession. The next morning, Nora found Keanu in the stable, brushing one of the horses. She stood quietly for a while, then said, I lied. He turned, waiting. I didn't just come for a story, she said. I came because I think my nephew needs this place. Keanu nodded slowly. What's his name? Max, she said. He hasn't spoken since the fire. Keanu put down the brush. Bring him, he said simply. When you're ready. Nora didn't expect that. No questions, no hesitation, just kindness. When Max came, 2 weeks later, Nora returned, with Max. The boy was pale, thin, eyes downcast. He held Ruby's collar in his hands like a sacred object. Elias met them at the gate. He looked at Max, then at the collar, and said, "Wanna meet someone who understands." He led Max to Bella. The dog looked up, limped over, and rested her head in Max's lap. Max's lip trembled, but he didn't run. He stayed. New stories, same promise. Nora extended her stay. She wrote her article, but it wasn't a takedown. It was a love letter. The shelter built by silence. It was titled, Where Grief Lays Down Beside You and Stays Until It Doesn't Hurt So Much. The article went viral. But more importantly, it changed people. Letters poured in. Donations arrived. More volunteers. More shelters were funded. More hearts found their way to the gate of Mia's promise. As the sun set behind the shelter, Nora sat beside Keanu on the back patio. "Do you ever think," she asked softly, "that you could love again?" He looked out at the children, the dogs, the lives blooming from pain. "I never stopped," he said. It just changed shape. And for the first time in years, Nora leaned her head on someone's shoulder. Not as a journalist, not as a visitor, but as a woman remembering how to believe again. When the whole world listened, the invitation came wrapped in white linen paper with gold lettering. Elegant, formal, understated in the way things of great importance often are. The World Kindness Summit cordially invites Keanu Reeves, founder of Mia's Promise, to deliver the closing keynote address on global compassion and healing. It would be held at the UN headquarters in New York City. Broadcast to millions. World leaders, Artists, survivors, and children from every continent would be watching. Keanu stared at the letter for a long time. He had never wanted to be a voice for anything. Not fame, not philosophy, not even healing. He was just a man who sat with a boy when no one else did, who held the leash of a dog that didn't trust anyone, who made a promise to a woman who once whispered, "Do something beautiful." But somehow his silence had become a language others understood. The decision. He didn't accept the invitation right away. He walked the grounds of the shelter for hours, stopped by the rose garden, where Mia's ashes had been scattered, placed a hand on the wooden sign that read, "You are safe here." Leo followed behind him, older now, slower, but still loyal. Keanu sat by the oak tree where Elias once wrote in silence. He thought of River, of Mia, of all the children who came to the shelter carrying invisible weights. And then, without a word, he stood up, walked inside, and picked up the phone. "I'll go," he said. Preparing for New York, word spread fast. Reporters gathered outside Mia's promise. They wanted sound bites, headlines, secrets. But Keanu didn't give them any. He spent his days walking dogs, reading to kids, washing dishes with volunteers. When Nora offered to help prepare his speech, he smiled and said, "It's already written." "Where?" she asked. He tapped his chest. "In here." Nora didn't press. She had stopped chasing stories with angles. Now she followed stories with heart. The summit. New York buzzed with electricity. Streets blocked off. Helicopters hovered. Banners read, "Kindness is not weakness. It's the greatest strength." The auditorium was full. Delegates from war-torn countries sat beside billionaires in designer suits. Children from villages wore second-hand shoes next to diplomats in polished leather. Keanu arrived wearing a simple black suit and a gray shirt. No tie. He walked in quietly, shook hands with no one, smiled politely, and waited backstage as world-famous speakers took the podium. Celebrities spoke of charity. Presidents spoke of peace. Scientists spoke of solutions. But when it was Keanu's turn, everything changed. The stage. He stepped onto the stage with no paper in hand. No teleprompter. Just him. And silence. At first, the crowd fidgeted. Cameras clicked. But then the room began to still. Because Keanu Reeves wasn't standing like a man about to deliver a speech. He was standing like a man about to deliver a truth. The speech. He looked out at the crowd. Then said, "I'm not a leader. I'm not a saint. I'm not someone who set out to change the world. I'm just someone who watched someone I loved die in a hospital bed while petting a dog we rescued together." And in her final breath, she said, "Don't mourn me with silence. Share what we built." His voice was calm, clear, filled with gravity. We live in a world that teaches us to be loud when we win and quiet when we grieve. But I learned the opposite, that the loudest victories are born in silence, that kindness whispers and then it grows. He looked directly into the camera, into the eyes of millions. When a boy named Elias came to our shelter, he hadn't spoken in a year. He thought pain made him invisible. But a dog sat beside him and waited. Now he speaks. Now he teaches others to wait for the hurting. A pause. When a woman named Nora came to us, she was chasing a story. But what she found was a nephew who hadn't smiled since the fire that took his family. Now that boy draws pictures of his dog and tells other kids they are not broken. They're still blooming. He stepped closer to the edge of the stage. "I'm not here because I built something. I'm here because I kept a promise. Because a woman named Neo once held a dying bird and cried over it like it was a child. Because she believed that healing isn't magic. It's daily, quiet, patient." The crowd was silent. Keanu breathed. Then said, "Asterisk, asterisk, so if you're watching this, and you're grieving, or angry, or feel like you failed, sit beside someone. You don't have to fix them. Just stay. Because sometimes presence is the only medicine we have left. Asterisk, asterisk. He looked up. And love, real love, doesn't need applause. It just needs to show up. The standing ovation. No one clapped at first. Not because they weren't moved, but because they couldn't move. Tears streamed. Hands covered mouths. Delegates dropped pens. And then, slowly, one person stood. Then another. And another. Until the whole auditorium rose. Not in celebration, but in reverence. The man behind the curtain. After the speech, Keanu walked backstage quietly. He found a corner, sat on the floor, and let the emotions settle. He wasn't looking for anyone, but someone found him. A man in a black coat. Tired eyes. Gray beard. Keanu froze. "Dad." The man nodded slowly. "I was watching," he said. Keanu stood still. "I never knew how to stay," his father said. "But you did. And I'm sorry I left." Keanu didn't speak. The silence lasted long. Then Keanu stepped forward and hugged him. Not out of forgiveness, not out of resolution, but out of a promise to never become the kind of man who lets bitterness win. Later that night, back in his hotel room, Keanu pulled out Mia's journal. He flipped to the last blank page and wrote, "I spoke for you today." And they listened. But more importantly, they felt you. He closed the book. Leo sighed beside him. And somewhere, in the space between pain and peace, Keanu finally slept without dreaming of loss. The gift she left behind. The plane touched down just before sunrise. KeanuReeves looked out the window, watching as the sky over California blushed with the colors of a new morning. Soft orange, deep purple, a whisper of gold. The world looked quiet, not because it had nothing to say, but because, for the first time in a long time, it didn't have to scream to be heard. The summit in New York was over. The applause had faded. The cameras were off. But something had changed. Not just in him, but in the world. Home again. Back at Mia's promise, the gravel crunched under his boots as he walked the familiar path to the front gate. It was early. The children were still asleep, the animals barely stirring. Leo trotted ahead, tail wagging, as if he knew they were finally home. Keanu paused at the wooden sign, fingers tracing the carved words once more. "You are safe here." Then he opened the gate and walked in. The surprise in the garden. As he neared the oak tree, the one where Elias first sat in silence, where Max now liked to read, where Mia used to rest with a notebook in her lap, he saw something unusual. There was a wooden box sitting beneath the tree. It wasn't fancy, just old oak, hand-carved, a soft blue ribbon tied around it. Attached was a note, in handwriting he hadn't seen in years. "For when you've kept your promise." Keanu dropped to his knees. His hands trembled as he lifted the lid. Inside the box, there were 4 things. The first was a faded photograph, him and Mia, smiling, standing under this very tree, with Leo between them. It had been taken by one of the children. Mia was holding a book. Keanu was holding a leash. But it wasn't the poses that struck him. It was the light in their eyes. Like they knew something no one else did. The second item was a small silver bracelet with the word "stay" engraved on the inside. He remembered giving it to her the night she first told him about her diagnosis. "Stay," he had said, "as long as you can." She had. In ways he never expected. The third was her journal, Mia's journal, but filled now with pages he'd never seen before. Dated entries, new stories, drawings of animals, poems about love and loss and laughter, and one final letter. Mia's last words. He opened the letter slowly. It was written in ink, her handwriting a little shaky but full of grace. "If you're reading this, it means you've done it. You kept the promise. And now, I want to tell you the rest of mine. I knew you'd build something, not because of me, but because of who you've always been. Quiet, patient, kind. You don't rescue people with words. You rescue them with presence. You just show up and stay. And that's everything. This center is not my legacy. You are. And the people you've touched, Elias, Max, Nora, the volunteers, the children, the broken dogs that found their way home. They are your light. But there's something else. You think you've given everything. But love doesn't run out. It multiplies. So when the day comes that love knocks again, let it in. Don't shut the door in the name of grief. You were never meant to live in mourning. You were meant to live in motion, in service, in laughter, in second chances. So this is me, saying goodbye one more time. Not because I'm gone, but because I'm already with you. In every thank you whispered through tears, in every bark of a saved dog, in every child who learns to hope again. I'm there. You did it, Keanu. And now, it's time to love again. He folded the letter with shaking hands, tears running down his face silently, falling into the grass below. For a long time, he said nothing. Just let the morning wrap around him. Then he smiled. Not the sad kind, but the kind that carried peace. Something new begins. Later that day, as the center filled with noise again, children laughing, dogs barking, stories being shared, Keanu walked through the garden with new eyes. He stopped by Elias, who was drawing a new comic strip about a superhero dog that saved a quiet boy. He helped Max plant sunflower seeds by the fence. He shared coffee with Nora, who had started volunteering full-time and was now building a writing program for kids like her nephew. And when someone asked if he was ever going to leave Hollywood behind completely, he simply said, "I'm not leaving anything behind. I'm bringing it forward." One last visitor. That evening, just before sunset, a woman arrived at the shelter. She wasn't famous. She wasn't lost. She wasn't broken. She was a teacher from a local school. She had heard the stories, seen the videos, and wanted to offer art classes to the children at the center. Her name was Lena. She had a soft smile, eyes like spring. And when she knelt to pet Leo, the dog, usually shy around strangers, nuzzled into her hand without hesitation. Keanu watched from the steps. He didn't feel a spark of romance. Not right away. What he felt was comfort, ease, curiosity. And when she looked up and smiled at him, something inside him whispered, "Stay open." That night, Keanu returned to the tree, the box now resting beside Mia's favorite bench. He sat down, opened her journal one more time, and added a line beneath her last entry. "I'm ready." He closed the book, looked up at the stars, and whispered, "Thank you." A year later, Mia's Promise Centers had opened in 12 cities. Elias had published his first children's book. Max had started speaking in classrooms, telling other kids that pain was not a life sentence. Nora's article had won an award, but she never mentioned it. She was too busy running after toddlers with paint on their hands. And Keanu, he still walked the grounds every morning, still cleaned kennels, still hugged children, still sat with strangers. But now, he did it with a lightness in his step, because he had learned something the world is still trying to understand. That love, no matter how it leaves us, always finds a way to return.